This is a story about my revenge, the revenge my son took on me, and the revenge my grandchildren then took on both of us. And believe me, it all ended so tragically that I wish I'd never had children or grandchildren than to have to deal with this. Before we begin the story, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us share these stories with the world. My name is Harold. I am 72 years old, and for the better part of 5 decades, I was a man who knew exactly who he was. I was a builder, a creator. I was the CEO and founder of HR Sterling Logistics, a shipping and distribution company that I started with one rusted van and a map of the tri-state area back when I was 23. I built that company while my wife, God rest her soul, managed the books at the kitchen table. We skipped vacations. We drove used cars until the wheels fell off. We sacrificed every single luxury so that the business could grow root by root into the oak tree it eventually became. By the time I turned 65, Sterling Logistics was valued in the mid-8 figures. We had a fleet of 300 trucks, 2 massive warehouses, and a reputation for reliability that money simply cannot buy. I was proud. I was tired, yes, but I was proud. I thought I was building a legacy. I thought I was building a kingdom that would keep my family safe and prosperous for generations. I did not realize I was building the very battlefield where my family would destroy itself. The trouble truly began 5 years ago, though the seeds were planted much earlier. It started with my son, David. David is my only child. When he was born, I looked at his small hands and promised myself he would never have to struggle the way I did. I sent him to the best private schools. I paid for his expensive university degree in business management. I gave him a seat at the table in the company as soon as he graduated, skipping over loyal employees who had been with me for 15 years. I thought I was being a good father. I thought I was grooming a successor. But David did not have my calluses. He did not have the memory of eating canned beans for dinner because we had to make payroll. To David, Sterling Logistics was not a labor of love. It was a piggy bank. He was 45 years old, wearing Italian suits that cost more than my first car, and he was impatient. He wanted the CEO chair. He wanted the title. Most of all, he wanted me to retire. It started subtly. In board meetings, David would interrupt me. He would smile that tight, condescending smile and say, "Dad, things are different now. We need to leverage technology. We need to cut overhead. We need to downsize the pension plan." I slammed my hand on the mahogany table the first time he suggested cutting the pensions. "Those men and women built this company," I told him. "We do not break promises to the people who sweat for us." David just rolled his eyes. He looked at the other board members, mostly men he had brought in, younger men with hungry eyes, and he sighed as if dealing with a senile old man. That was his strategy. He didn't attack me directly. He just painted me as a relic. He whispered in the hallways that I was losing my edge, that I was stuck in the past, that I was holding the company back from its true potential. The war between us officially began on a rainy Tuesday in November. I walked into my office to find David sitting in my chair. He didn't stand up when I entered. He just gestured to a stack of papers on the desk. "What is this?" I asked, the smell of ozone and rain still clinging to my coat. "It is a buyout package, Dad," David said smoothly. "It is generous, extremely generous. You take this, you go to Florida, you play golf, and you let me take it from here. The board is ready to vote on a restructuring plan. If you don't step down voluntarily, we have the votes to remove you as CEO based on a lack of confidence." I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the weather. This was my son. The boy I taught to ride a bike. The boy I held when he cried over his first breakup. He was looking at me like I was an obstacle to be removed. "You think you can run this company?" I asked him, my voice low. "You do not know the first thing about loyalty, David. You think this business is just numbers on a spreadsheet." "It is numbers on a spreadsheet," he snapped, his mask slipping for a second. "That is all it is, Dad. Sentimentality is costing us millions. Sign the papers." I did not sign the papers. I tore them in half and dropped them on the floor. "Get out of my chair," I said. David stood up, smoothing his tie. He looked at me with pure venom. "You are going to regret this. I tried to do this the easy way. Now we do it the hard way." That was the declaration of war. For the next 2 years, my life became a living hell within the walls of the building I had constructed. David used his position as COO to undermine every decision I made. If I ordered new trucks, he canceled the order citing budget concerns. If I promoted a loyal manager, he buried them in paperwork and audits until they quit. He created a toxic environment where employees were forced to choose sides: Team Harold or Team David. It was exhausting. I was 70 years old, fighting a daily battle against my own flesh and blood. But I refused to yield. I knew that if David took over, he would strip the company for parts, sell off the assets, and fire the workforce just to boost the stock price for a quick sale. I was fighting for the soul of the company. And then there was Michael. Michael was David's son, my grandson. He was 24 years old, fresh out of his own MBA program. He was a quiet young man, tall and thin, with glasses that constantly slid down his nose. He had always been the peacemaker in the family. When David and I would argue at Thanksgiving dinners, Michael would be the one to change the subject, to pour the wine, to smooth things over. When Michael asked for a job at the company, David was against it. He didn't want his son seeing the ugly power struggle up close. But I insisted. I hired Michael as a junior analyst. I thought, perhaps foolishly, that Michael could be the bridge. Or, if David was too far gone, maybe Michael could be the heir I actually needed. Michael was diligent. He kept his head down. He worked in a small cubicle near my office, and unlike his father, he listened. He would come into my office late in the afternoon with 2 coffees. "Rough day, Grandpa?" he would ask. I would sigh, rubbing my temples. "Your father is trying to close the Jersey warehouse again. He doesn't understand that location is strategic for the tri-state deliveries." Michael would nod thoughtfully. "He is just looking at the rent cost, Grandpa. He is not seeing the fuel savings. I can run a report for you. I can show him the data that proves you are right." And he would. Michael became my secret weapon. He provided me with spreadsheets and projections that countered David's arguments. Every time David tried to corner me in a board meeting with skewed numbers, Michael would slip me a folder with the real data just minutes beforehand. I would present it, and David would turn red with rage, looking around the room, wondering how I had outmaneuvered him again. I began to trust Michael. I saw him as the anti-David. He seemed humble. He seemed to respect the legacy. I started inviting him to my house on weekends. We would sit on the back porch and I would tell him stories about the early days, about the drivers who risked driving through blizzards to make deliveries, about the ethos of the company. Michael would listen intently, his eyes wide behind his glasses. "I wish I could help more, Grandpa," he said one evening, looking down at his hands. "I hate seeing what Dad is doing to you. It is not right. He is consumed by greed." "He is, Michael," I agreed. "He has lost his way. I did not know it then, but I was falling into a trap. I was so desperate for an ally, so desperate for a family member who actually loved me, that I ignored the oldest rule in the book: never trust anyone in a game of power, especially not the quiet ones." The escalation reached a breaking point last year. David, frustrated by his inability to oust me, decided to go nuclear. He filed a lawsuit against me, his own father, alleging financial mismanagement. It was a fabrication, of course. He accused me of using company funds for personal expenses, claiming that my charitable donations were actually embezzlement. It was dirty. It was public. The local business journals picked up the story. Son sues father for control of Sterling Logistics. I was humiliated. I had to walk into the office past whispering secretaries and staring employees. I had to hire a criminal defense attorney to protect myself against my son. I sat in my office staring at the summons, feeling old and defeated. Michael knocked softly and entered. He looked devastated. "Grandpa, this is insane," he said. "He has gone too far." "He wants to destroy me, Michael," I said, my voice shaking. "He does not care if he burns the company down, as long as he is standing on top of the ashes." "We have to stop him," Michael said. His voice was different this time, harder. "How?" I asked. "He has the board in his pocket. He has these lawyers. We have to hit him where it hurts," Michael said. "I found something." He walked around my desk and placed a file in front of me. "What is this?" "Dad has been running a side deal," Michael whispered. "He is receiving kickbacks from one of our subcontractors. The packaging supplier we switched to last year? The one that is 20% more expensive? Dad is getting a cut of that contract deposited into an offshore account." I opened the file. There were bank statements, emails. It was damning evidence of corporate fraud. If this came out, David would not just be fired. He would go to jail. I looked up at my grandson. "How did you get this?" "Does it matter?" Michael asked. "This is the silver bullet, Grandpa. You can end this. You can force him out today." I looked at the papers. This was my son, my own flesh and blood. If I used this, I would be sending him to prison. But if I didn't, he would destroy my life's work and drag my name through the mud. "Do it, Grandpa," Michael urged. "He would do it to you. In fact, he is doing it to you right now with lies. At least this is the truth." I took a deep breath. I felt a hardness settle over my heart, a callus forming over the love I once had for my son. "Call the board," I told Michael. "Emergency meeting. Tonight." The meeting was a bloodbath. I walked in, threw the file on the table, and watched David's face turn the color of ash. He tried to deny it, tried to bluster, but the evidence was irrefutable. The board members who had supported him suddenly looked at their shoes. They realized they had backed a criminal. By the end of the hour, David was stripped of his titles. He was escorted out of the building by security. As he was leaving, he stopped at the door and looked back. He didn't look at me. He looked at Michael, who was standing quietly in the corner. David's eyes narrowed. "You," he spat. "You little snake." Michael didn't say a word. He just adjusted his glasses. I went home that night feeling a hollow victory. I had saved the company, but I had lost my son forever. I poured myself a scotch and sat in the dark. The next morning, I arrived at the office early. I expected to feel relief. Instead, I felt a strange tension. I called Michael into my office. "We need to stabilize the ship," I told him. "With your father gone, there is a power vacuum. I am going to appoint you as interim COO. You have earned it, Michael. You saved us." Michael smiled. It was a smile I had never seen before. It didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, Grandpa, we need to talk about that," he said. He sat down in the chair opposite me, the same chair his father used to sit in. "I don't think interim COO is going to work," he said. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "You are young, Michael. You need experience. I will guide you." "No," Michael said. He leaned forward. "See, Grandpa, you missed something in the bylaws. When a board member is removed for cause, like Dad was last night, their shares do not just disappear. They go into a trust that is managed by the next of kin, provided that kin is an employee of the company." I stared at him. The silence in the room was deafening. "I am the next of kin, Grandpa. I control Dad's shares now, and combined with the shares Mom left me when she passed, and the proxies I gathered from the board members this morning who are terrified of being implicated in Dad's scandal." He paused, savoring the moment. "I have 51% of the voting stock." My mouth went dry. "What are you saying, Michael?" "I am saying that you are right, Grandpa. The company does need a new vision. But it is not yours. You are too emotional. You let Dad run circles around you for years because you were conflicted. And Dad? Dad was a crook. Neither of you deserves this place." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the truck yard. "I orchestrated this, Grandpa. I found the kickbacks. I fed Dad the bad ideas that made you mad. I fed you the data that made Dad mad. I wound you both up and watched you tear each other apart. And now that you have taken each other out, I am the only one left standing." He turned back to me. "I am calling a vote at noon. You are out, Grandpa. Forced retirement." I stood up, shaking with rage. "You can't do this. I built this. I trust you." "That was your mistake," Michael said coldly. "This is business. This brings us to the midpoint of our saga. I was a man who had just decapitated his own son to save his kingdom, only to find that the executioner I hired was holding the blade to my own throat. I stood there in that office, the office where I had spent 40 years of my life, and realized that the true enemy wasn't the loud, arrogant son I had fought for 5 years. It was the quiet, helpful grandson who had been pouring my coffee and plotting my demise the entire time. But if Michael thought I was going to go gently into that good night, he was sorely mistaken. He had forgotten one thing about me. I didn't just build this company with money. I built it with dirt, sweat, and connections that a 24-year-old boy could not possibly understand. Michael had taken the crown, yes, but he didn't know that the castle was rigged to explode. And that is where the real story begins. Because if he wanted a war, I was going to give him a war that would make my battle with his father look like a playground squabble. I picked up the phone. I had one call to make. A call to a man I hadn't spoken to in 30 years. A man who knew where all the bodies were buried because he helped me bury them. We are just getting started. I walked out of the HR Sterling Logistics building at 12:45 p.m. on a Wednesday. I did not have a retirement party. I did not have a gold watch. I had a cardboard box filled with framed photos of my late wife, a stapler that had sat on my desk since 1985, and the heavy, suffocating weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. The security guard who escorted me out was a man named Larry. I had hired Larry 20 years ago when he was down on his luck. I had paid for his daughter's braces. Larry walked me to the curb, his eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Sterling, I am so sorry," Larry whispered, refusing to look me in the eye. "He says I have to take your badge." I handed him the plastic rectangle that had been my identity for half a century. "Do not apologize, Larry," I said. "You have a job to do. Keep your head down." I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time. I watched the trucks roll in and out of the bays, trucks that I had bought, driven by men I knew by name. Up on the 4th floor I could see the silhouette of Michael standing in the window of my office. He was looking down at me. He was the king of the castle now. He had won. But as I drove away, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, I thought about the phone call I had made just minutes before leaving. I drove to a small, run-down diner on the edge of town, a place with cracked vinyl seats and coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. Sitting in the back booth was Sal. Sal was a rough man. He was 70 years old, with skin like leather and hands that looked like they could crush a brick. Sal wasn't an employee of Sterling Logistics. He was the head of the Independent Owner-Operators Association in our region. Years ago, when the unions were trying to strangle my business, I had cut a handshake deal with Sal. I promised his drivers fair rates, guaranteed routes, and respect. In exchange, Sal gave me loyalty. He controlled 60% of the drivers who hauled our freight. These weren't company employees. They were contractors. They answered to Sal, not to the HR department. "Harold," Sal said as I slid into the booth, "I heard the news. The kid actually did it?" "He did it, Sal," I said. "He owns 51%. He fired David. He forced me out." Sal shook his head, stirring his black coffee. Kids today, they think business is just math. They forget it's about blood and sweat. So, what do you want to do? You want me to torch a warehouse? Because you know I will. No, Sal, I said. We are not criminals. We are businessmen. I leaned across the table. Michael thinks he bought a logistics company, but a logistics company is nothing without drivers. He is going to try to cut costs. He is going to try to automate. He is going to treat your men like numbers. I know, Sal grunted. I already got a memo. Rate renegotiations effective immediately. The kid wants to cut the mile rate by 15%. I nodded. Here's what we are going to do. I don't want a strike. A strike makes the news. A strike gives him a reason to sue. I want malicious compliance. Sal raised an eyebrow. I want your drivers to follow every single rule in the book, I said. Every safety regulation, every speed limit, every mandatory brake. If a tire tread is 1 millimeter too low, the truck does not move until it is replaced. If a manifest is off by 1 ounce, the truck does not leave the dock. If there is heavy traffic, they do not find a shortcut. They sit in it. I want you to slow the blood flow of that company until it passes out. Sal smiled, a slow, cruel smile. The white flew. We can do that. For the next 3 months, I sat at home in my empty house. It was torture. I was a man of action, forced to watch daytime television and eat microwave dinners. I saw my son, David, once. He came by to borrow money. He looked terrible. He had lost his severance package in the legal battle, and with his reputation destroyed by the fraud scandal, no one would hire him. He blamed me, of course. You let that snake into the hen house, Dad, David screamed at me in my living room. You trusted him over me. I trusted him because you were stealing from me, I yelled back. We were a broken family screaming at each other in a mausoleum of memories. David stormed out with a check for $5,000, and I haven't seen him since. Meanwhile, the reports from inside Sterling Logistics began to trickle in. It started small. On-time delivery rates dropped from 98% to 85%, then 75%. Clients started complaining. Perishable goods were spoiling on the docks because drivers were refusing to load unsafe pallets. Michael, in his arrogance, tried to crack down. He sent out threatening emails. He fired a few vocal drivers. That was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Sal's network tightened the noose. Suddenly, trucks were breaking down en masse. Keys were getting lost. Paperwork was vanishing. I still had a few loyalists inside the office, secretaries and junior dispatchers who hated Michael's new corporate culture. They forwarded me his internal memos. I read them with a dark satisfaction. Urgent, we are losing the Walmart contract if we miss another window. Urgent, cash flow critical. We need to liquidate the secondary fleet. Michael was bleeding money. He had taken out a massive loan to buy out the remaining shareholders and consolidate his power, assuming the company's profits would cover the debt service. But with revenue plummeting, the banks were circling. He tried to pivot. He announced a tech-first initiative. He spent millions on a new AI dispatch system that was supposed to replace human dispatchers. It was a disaster. The software was buggy, sending trucks to the wrong states, routing hazardous materials through residential neighborhoods. 6 months after he ousted me, my phone rang. It was late on a rainy Tuesday night. The caller ID said, Michael Sterling. I let it ring. I sat in my armchair, drinking my scotch, listening to the rain against the window. It rang again and again. Finally, I picked up. Hello? Grandpa? Michael's voice sounded thin, brittle. Hello, Michael. To what do I owe the pleasure? I need help, he said. He didn't even try to make small talk. The banks are calling the loan. The drivers. I don't know what is happening. They are sabotaging me. Imagine that, I said coldly. It is almost as if you don't know how to treat people. I know you are talking to them, Michael snapped, a flash of his old arrogance returning. I know you are talking to Sal. Tell him to stop. Tell him to get back to work, or I will sue him into oblivion. You can't sue people for following the safety laws, Michael. Grandpa, please, his voice cracked. I am going to lose everything. The house, the car, the company. They are talking about bankruptcy. Chapter 11. I took a sip of my drink. You wanted the crown, Michael. It is heavy, isn't it? Grandpa, if the company goes under, your legacy dies too. My legacy died the day you betrayed your own father and grandfather for a paycheck, I said. You killed the legacy. I am just watching the funeral. There was a silence on the other end of the line. A long, heavy silence. Then, Michael said something that chilled me to the bone. I am not going to let it fail, Grandpa. I have a buyer. I sat up straight. Who? Vantage Logistics, he said. My blood ran cold. Vantage was a private equity firm known for one thing: stripping assets. They didn't run shipping companies. They bought them, sold the trucks, sold the real estate, fired every single employee, and kept the brand name to slap on cheap third-party contractors. Selling to Vantage wasn't saving the company, it was executing it. It would put 300 families out on the street. You can't do that, I said. They will gut it. I don't have a choice, Michael screamed. They are offering me enough to pay off the debts and walk away with a little bit of cash. I am signing the deal on Friday. You can't, I said. Watch me, Michael hissed. You wanted to play hardball? Fine. I am taking my ball and going home. I burn it down, Grandpa. I burn it all down. The line went dead. I sat there in the dark, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had pushed him too far. I wanted to teach him a lesson, to force him to come crawling back to me so I could step in as the savior. But I had underestimated his selfishness. He didn't care about the company. He didn't care about the employees. He just wanted to save his own skin. I had 48 hours to stop the sale. If Vantage took over, everything I built for 50 years would be gone. The drivers, the warehouse workers, the office staff, all unemployed. I realized then that my revenge had backfired. I had tried to starve the beast to tame it, but instead I had turned it into a cornered animal ready to bite its own throat. I stood up. I had to go back. I had to go to the office. I put on my coat and drove through the rain to the building I hadn't entered in 6 months. The parking lot was empty, except for Michael's expensive sports car and a single black sedan parked near the entrance. I used my old key to the side door. Larry had never actually deactivated it, a small act of rebellion I hadn't appreciated until now. I walked through the silent hallways. The office smelled of stale coffee and desperation. I walked up the stairs to the executive suite. The door to my old office was open. Michael was there, but he wasn't alone. Sitting across from him were 2 men in dark suits. Lawyers for Vantage, I assumed. Papers were spread out on the desk. I stepped into the doorway. Don't sign it, Michael. Michael jumped. He looked terrible. Pale, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes. The 2 lawyers turned to look at me, annoyed. Who is this? One of them asked. Get out, Grandpa, Michael said, his voice shaking. You are trespassing. I walked into the room. I am not trespassing. I am the founder of this company, and you are making a mistake. I am saving my life, Michael shouted, standing up. He looked unhinged. You turned everyone against me. You made it impossible to run this place. So give it back, I roared. Resign. Hand the board control back to me. I can fix it. I can make 1 phone call and the trucks will move again. I can restructure the debt. Give it back to me, Michael. Don't sell it to these vultures. Michael looked at the pen in his hand. Then he looked at me. There was a look in his eyes that I couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger anymore. It was pure, distilled spite. You think you can just waltz back in here and be the hero? Michael whispered. After you humiliated me? After you destroyed my numbers? He looked at the lawyers. Where do I sign? Michael! I lunged forward. Security! Michael yelled, though there was no security. He scribbled his signature on the document. He signed it. He actually signed it. There, he said, dropping the pen. It is done. It is theirs. I don't own it anymore. And neither do you. He looked at me with a twisted grin. I would rather be the captain of a sinking ship that I sold for scrap than let you take the wheel again. The lawyer smiled, collected the papers, and stood up. Pleasure doing business, Mr. Sterling. I stood there, frozen. I looked at my grandson. He had just sold my life's work for pennies on the dollar just to spite me. But as I looked at him, I realized something. He was shaking. He wasn't looking at me with triumph. He was looking at me with fear. Because he didn't know what I knew. He didn't know about the clause in the original incorporation documents from 1978. A clause that David had forgotten about, and Michael had never bothered to read because it was buried in the physical archives in the basement, not on a spreadsheet. I looked at the lawyers. Gentlemen, I said quietly, before you celebrate, you might want to check the deed to the land this building sits on. The lawyers stopped. The lead attorney frowned. What are you talking about? Michael sold you the company, I said. He sold you the brand, the trucks, and the contracts. But Sterling Logistics doesn't own the land. Nor do we own the warehouses. I turned to Michael. His face went white. I separated the real estate holdings into a separate LLC 20 years ago to protect them from liability lawsuits, I said. I am the sole proprietor of Sterling Properties. The company just leases the buildings. I looked back at the lawyers. And the lease expired yesterday. I didn't renew it. The room went dead silent. That means, I continued, my voice trembling with adrenaline, that as of midnight last night, Sterling Logistics is operating on my property without a lease, and I am evicting you. I looked at Michael. You sold them a company that has nowhere to operate. You sold them a hollow shell. And you, gentlemen, if you want to keep your trucks here, the rent just went up by 500%. I thought I had played the ultimate trump card. I thought I had checkmated him. I thought I had won. I was wrong. I didn't know that the tragedy wasn't about money, or buildings, or trucks. The tragedy was about to happen right there in that room, and no amount of legal maneuvering could stop it. Michael looked at me, his eyes wide, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He looked at the lawyers, who were now glaring at him with predatory fury. They realized they had been sold a lemon. They realized Michael had committed fraud by not disclosing the lease status. You set me up, Michael whispered. No, Michael, I said. I protected myself. Michael reached into his desk drawer. I expected him to pull out another file, or maybe a resignation letter. Instead, he pulled out a gun. My grandson Michael has just sold my company to a vulture capitalist firm, only for me to reveal that I still own the land and buildings, rendering the sale worthless. In a panic, Michael has pulled a gun in my office. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of my lungs. The two lawyers from Vantage Logistics, men who likely charged $1,000 an hour to destroy companies, were suddenly very small. They were pressed against the back wall, their hands raised, their arrogance evaporated. Michael, I said, my voice incredibly calm, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Put it down. This is not the way. It is the only way, Michael screamed. His hand was shaking so violently that the barrel of the pistol wavered between me and the lawyers. You cornered me, Grandpa. You and Dad. You treated me like a pawn. I'm not a person to you. I'm just a successor. I'm just an asset. You are my grandson, I said, taking a slow step forward. Stay back, he yelled. Tears were streaming down his face now. He looked so young. In that moment, he wasn't the CEO who had betrayed me. He was the 7-year-old boy I used to take fishing. He was the child who cried when he scraped his knee. And I had pushed him to this. I had pushed him into a corner with no exit, just to prove a point, just to win a business deal. The lead lawyer, a man named Henderson, spoke up, his voice trembling. "Look, kid. Mr. Sterling, we can void the contract. We can rip it up. Just put the gun down. We don't want the company." "It's too late." Michael sobbed. He wiped his nose with his sleeve. The gun still pointed wildly. "I committed fraud. Grandpa said it. I signed the disclosure stating the lease was valid. If you walk out of here, you'll call the police. You'll sue me. I'm going to prison." I looked at Michael and I saw the absolute terror in his eyes. He had lived his whole life trying to live up to the Sterling name. He had tried to outsmart his father. Then he tried to outsmart me. And now, he was looking at a life behind bars because he tried to play a game he wasn't ready for. "Michael, look at me," I said softly. "I won't let them call the police. I own the building, remember? I call the shots here. We can fix this. I will hire the best lawyers. We will say it was a misunderstanding. But you have to give me the gun." He hesitated. For a second I saw the hope in his eyes. He wanted to believe me. He wanted his grandfather to save him, just like I used to save him from school bullies. But then, the door to the office burst open. It wasn't Larry the security guard. It was the police. One of the secretaries downstairs must have seen the gun on the security cameras, or perhaps one of the lawyers had triggered a silent panic button on their phone. 2 officers in tactical vests stormed into the room, weapons drawn. "Drop the weapon! Police! Drop it now!" The shouting was deafening. The energy in the room shifted from tragic to kinetic in a split second. Michael panicked. He spun around toward the door, the gun still in his hand. He wasn't trying to shoot them. I know in my soul he wasn't trying to shoot them. He was startled. He was a scared kid turning toward the noise, but the officers didn't know that. They saw a man with a gun turning toward them. They saw a threat. "No!" I screamed, reaching out my hand. 2 shots rang out. They were loud, incredibly loud, deafening in the confined space of the executive office. Michael was thrown back as if he had been kicked in the chest by a horse. He hit the window overlooking the trucking yard he had tried so desperately to rule, and slid down to the floor. The glass didn't break. It just smeared with red. The room froze. The lawyers were screaming. The officers were moving in, kicking the gun away, shouting codes into their radios. I didn't hear any of it. My ears were ringing. I walked forward, my legs feeling like they were made of lead, and fell to my knees beside my grandson. He was looking at me. His glasses were crooked. There was a look of total confusion on his face, as if he couldn't understand why his chest hurt so much. "Grandpa?" he whispered. It was a wet, gurgling sound. "I am here, Michael," I said, grabbing his hand. It was cold. "I am here. I just wanted to win," he gasped. "I know," I sobbed, tears blinding me. "I know. You won, Michael. You beat me. You won." His eyes drifted to the ceiling. His grip on my hand tightened, then loosened. And then he was gone. The next few hours were a blur of flashing lights, yellow tape, and questions I couldn't answer. I sat in the back of an ambulance, a shock blanket wrapped around me, staring at the rain puddles in the parking lot. David arrived an hour later. He drove his car right up to the police line, nearly hitting an officer. He ran under the tape, screaming his son's name. When he saw me, he stopped. I was standing near the coroner's van. He looked at the body bag being loaded into the back. Then he looked at me. "You," David whispered. He walked toward me. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You did this," he said. "David, You did this!" he screamed, lunging at me. A police officer had to hold him back. "You couldn't just retire. You couldn't just let go. You had to win. You had to prove you were the big man. Are you happy now, Dad? You won. You own the company. You own the land. You own all of it. And Michael is dead. He spat at my feet. I hope you rot in this place, David hissed as the officer dragged him away. I hope you die in that chair. I never want to see you again. You aren't my father. You're a monster. That was 6 months ago. I am sitting in my office now. The bullet hole in the wall has been patched over, but I know exactly where it is. I had the carpet replaced, but I still see the stain every time I look at the floor. Vantage Logistics withdrew their offer, obviously. The scandal was too great. The white flu ended the day Michael died. The drivers, out of respect or perhaps pity, returned to work. The company is profitable again. The stock price has stabilized. I am the CEO, the chairman, and the sole owner of Sterling Logistics. I come to work every day at 7 a.m. I sit at my mahogany desk. I read the reports. I sign the checks. I look out the window at the trucks moving in perfect synchronization, a ballet of commerce that I spent 50 years perfecting. But the silence is deafening. My phone never rings with calls from family. I have no one to leave this to. David has moved across the country. He changed his number and sent a cease and desist letter through a lawyer to prevent me from contacting him. I have no other children. I have no other grandchildren. I am a king, yes, but I am the king of a graveyard. Every evening before I go home to my empty house, I drive to the cemetery on the hill. I stand over Michael's grave. The stone is simple. Michael Sterling, beloved son. David didn't include grandson on the epitaph. That was his final act of revenge against me. He erased me from Michael's memory. I stand there and I talk to the dirt. I tell Michael about the business. I tell him that we upgraded the fleet. I tell him that I finally implemented some of his ideas about the software and that he was right, they were efficient, but the dirt doesn't answer. I realized too late that a legacy isn't about trucks or warehouses or profit margins. A legacy is the people you leave behind to remember you, and I sacrificed the people to save the profits. I got my revenge on my son. I got my revenge on my grandson. I outsmarted them both. I proved I was the smartest, toughest businessman in the room. And my reward is that I will die alone, and when they lower me into the ground, there will be no one there to shed a tear. The company will be sold to the highest bidder, maybe even Vantage Logistics, and my name will be scraped off the trucks within a week. So to answer the question I asked you at the beginning, can a family business survive greed? The business can survive. The family cannot. If you are listening to this, and you are fighting with your family over money, over a will, over a business, stop. Just stop. Let them have it. Walk away. Because I would give every single dime, every single truck, and every single brick of this empire just to have one more cup of bad coffee with my grandson and hear him call me Grandpa. But I can't. This is Harold Sterling, signing off for the last time. End of story. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments. Do you think Harold deserves forgiveness, or is he responsible for the tragedy? I'll be reading your replies.
My grandpa's worst really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales like this, hit subscribe.